Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about some of the books that I've read over the last year and a half or so. The first book in the list is this one right here, Simon R. Green's Drinking Midnight Wine. Now, this book focuses on a character named Toby Dexter. He's basically just a bookstore clerk. He gets attracted to a woman that comes into his store and he follows her to the train station one night. Basically, he sees her go through a doorway in a wall that wasn't there the moment before, and he ends up following her and finding himself in another world. And the story progresses from there when he finally gets her attention and things start to happen. It's an okay book. I didn't think it was super great. If you're familiar with Simon Green, you probably know him as the author of Deathstalker and the Nightside novels, and also he wrote a series called Secret History, which starts with the man with the golden torque. You know, I haven't read any of those. I've read some of the Deathstalker stuff, which is pretty entertaining. This one's okay, but it's not as good as Deathstalker or Nightside books. And then we get to Tad Williams, The War of the Flowers. This book was okay. I'm not a huge fan of books that use the world of fairy as a setting. This one's more like a modern day fairy where they almost have business kind of like we have in the modern world. It's just that it's all magical and stuff. They have tall buildings that the richest people live in, stuff like that. It's a decent book. It's basically, I don't know, I guess the themes would probably be class warfare because there are very rich fairies that are trying to keep the poorer fairies from rising up and, you know, overthrowing various things. There's like 5 or 6 houses that are basically the most powerful houses. And a guy from Earth, a musician, gets pulled over into Fairy because Fairy initially sends someone to try to kill him, and someone from Fairy goes to save him, and then he gets pulled into Fairy. It's an interesting story, but, you know, there's a lot of fantastical stuff in it. It's not terrible. It's not great. I'd probably, if I was going to rate it, probably a 7 out of 10. And then we get this one here by Lynn Dayton. It's an older book called SSGB. The premise in this one is that Nazi Germany won World War II, and the main character is a detective at Scotland Yard, and he has to deal with not only his Scotland Yard bosses, but he also has to deal with the Nazi military infrastructure and the criminal investigation wing of that in this book. It's a really good book for about 3/4 of it, but then like the last quarter of it or so gets really confusing if you don't know anything about the different departments within the Nazi infrastructure and how they all interact. It ends okay, but you know, it's a pretty well-known book, I guess, from when it was written. But I don't know, if I was going to rate it, I'd probably give it a 6 or 7 out of 10. And we get to the first Stephen King book here that I read in a while. This was From a Buick 8. It's an okay book. It's about a bunch of state troopers that have a car hidden in a shed behind their station, and there's something weird about this car. The temperature in the shed always stays a constant temperature unless something is about to happen with the car, and when something happens with the car, like all the lights on the car start shining and flashing, and they're really super bright, and people have gone into the shed and not come out of the shed when this has happened. There's like this whole creeping dread kind of a feel to the story, and it almost seems like this was kind of Stephen King's maybe attempt at doing a Lovecraftian type thing. He pulls it off pretty well. It was an interesting book. I read it in a couple days, even though I don't usually have a lot of time to read novels. But I enjoyed it. I enjoy most of Stephen King's stuff, though, so I'm not really the harshest judge of his stuff. But I'd probably give this one a 7 as well. And then if you're a fan of old movies, you've probably seen The Maltese Falcon, which is a really great movie with Humphrey Bogart from way back in the day. Almost 100 years ago now. This book pretty much is exactly what the movie gives you. There's a little more detail in the book, 1 or 2 side plots that aren't covered too much in the movie. But I liked the book a lot. It was an easy read. The language is a bit different, a little more clipped than you get nowadays, not so flowery. But then again, it is that detective noir genre that a lot of people like. So there you go. If I was going to rate this, I'd give it an 8. And then we get to Terry Brooks's Word in the Void trilogy. The first book, Running with the Demon. I've had this for years, 2.5 decades, I guess. As a matter of fact, Terry Brooks signed it for me way back at the very first Star Wars celebration in Denver, Colorado, when me and my brother went to it. So this book is basically pretty much the beginning of the Shannara type stuff, the Shannara world, basically. There's a guy named John Ross. He's a Knight of the Word. He's basically moving around the world, fighting demons wherever this lady that he works for tells him to go. It's a decent book. The main character, the other main character in it is a girl named Nest Freemark, and she's a teenager when this book starts, and she's really heavy into running, but she can see like the dark creatures in the night that come for people when certain emotions get high and stuff like that. And John Ross comes into her life, and she's not real sure who her father is, and at one point she thinks it might be John Ross, and then the book goes on from there. So if I was going to rate this, I'd give it probably an 8. And then the second book in that trilogy is called A Knight of the Word, and this one focuses a lot on John Ross. He's basically kind of lost his way because of an incident that happened with one of his missions, and it just kind of broke his heart with what happened, and he kind of abandoned the word for a while, and then he moves to Seattle, and some things happen, and Nest Freemark ends up going to Seattle. She's a college student at this point, and she goes to Seattle to try to see what's going on with John, and the story progresses from there. It's a pretty good book. Kind of suffers from the old middle book in a trilogy kind of curse thing, but I'd probably give this one a 6. So book 3 in the series is Angel Fire East. John Ross and Nest Freemark are back in Hopewell, Illinois, where she lives in her grandfather's old house. Her grandfather's passed away at this point in the story, and she's graduated college, and she's won some Olympic medals because she was big on running, and she was a big competitor and very successful at it. But basically, John Ross shows up and asks her to help him guard something that he's got, and she helps him, and the demons show up, and the ending is a little unsatisfying because of the resolution with the demon, but other than that, this is a pretty good ending to the entire series. If you go on to read the Genesis of Shannara series, that ties directly into what happens at the end of this third Angel Fire East book. Now, there's a nonfiction book here called See No Evil. This is basically kind of a memoir of a CIA agent. Talks a little bit about growing up, and also talks about different operations that he was involved in various places like Lebanon and other places in the Middle East. It's an interesting book. There's some pretty tense moments and some moments that are a little boring, and it kind of gives you a good idea of what CIA officers probably deal with on a daily basis during their careers. So I'd probably rate this one probably about an 8. Pretty decent book. Then we have Fear of the Dark by Walter Mosley. It's basically about a guy named Paris Minton, whose cousin Ulysses Grant calls him. One day, everybody calls Ulysses useless because he's a bit of a con artist and always using people for what he can get and then disappearing on them. And he basically tells Paris, hey, I need help. Can you help me? And Paris tries to help him, but the first part of helping the guy is trying to find him, and that's what a decent chunk of this book is about. But Walter Mosley is a really good writer. If you've never read any Walter Mosley stuff, I would highly encourage you to pick something up by him. You probably won't go wrong no matter what you pick up. So if you get a chance, read this one. I'd give this one a 7 out of 10. Now we got some paperbacks here. This one's called Lunar Descent by Alan Steele. If you haven't read any Alan Steele, the guy writes really good, solid science fiction books. This one is about a group of workers that are on the moon. They're working in a moon base, and they're trying to unionize, but the company that runs the place is basically trying to screw them over, and it's all about their efforts to try to overcome the company's plots to strip them of their rights and strip them of their jobs, basically. I'd give this one a 8 out of 10. Another Alan Steele book is Oceanspace. Now, you'll probably find this one in the science fiction section because it's written by Alan Steele, but it's barely science fiction. The most science fiction element about it is a giant sea creature that everybody's worried about attacking the base that they're in, which is like 1,000 feet underwater. It's more about some intrigue that's going on among the people than it is about this actual sea creature that's running around that everybody seems to be worried about. It's not the best Alan Steele book I've ever read. I'd probably give it maybe a 5 out of 10 because I consider it kind of middle of the road. So if you get a chance, maybe if you're interested in ocean stuff and deep sea research, this might be a good book for you. Now there is William C. Dietz, The Final Battle, which is not the final battle because I think there's other books in the series after this. This is from the Legion of the Damned, which I read that book years ago and it was pretty entertaining. This book is pretty much the same thing. It's military science fiction. Follows multiple different characters through different things that they're doing, and then a war starts and different battles take place. It's a decent book. If you're into military sci-fi, I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. And we get some Dean Koontz here. This one's called The Good Guy. It's basically about a woman who's being stalked by a killer and another guy that accidentally gets involved with the whole situation and ends up trying to help her out. It's your basic, almost Hollywood movie type of script that was turned into a book. So it's not great, not bad. It's Dean Koontz. It's an easy read too. So if you're interested in a decent action-y type book, this might be okay for you. I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10. Which isn't bad. 5 out of 10 is just middle of the road for me. Then we get to Stephen King, Pet Sematary. This book is pretty good. Other reviewers I've seen say that it's really a meditation on grief and what you would do to bring back the person that you love or the pet that you love. There's a lot of that going on in this book, and it does not turn out well for anybody. But this is a well-written book, like most of King stuff, and this was probably this was written way back before editors were afraid to cut anything out of his stuff. So it's a much shorter book than some of his later stuff. Pet Sematary. I would recommend it. Probably give it a 7 out of 10. And then we have Different Seasons. If you're not familiar with this book, it has 4 different stories in it. One is Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, which is what the movie The Shawshank Redemption was based on, and that is probably my favorite movie of all time. And then you've got Apt Pupil, which there was a movie based on that. That one is about a young boy that becomes obsessed with his neighbor, who he finds out is a Nazi, and some things progress from there, and it's an interesting story. And then the other one is The Body, which is what the film Stand By Me was based on. And that's just a really good examination of friendship and what it all means and the lengths people are willing to go to be friends with somebody and what they'll put up with to be friends with somebody. The last one in the book is called, I can't remember. The last one in the book is called The Breathing Method. It's kind of a weird story. It's about a doctor that tells this tale about a woman that's pregnant and the circumstances around her pregnancy, and then when she gives birth to the child, some stuff happens, and it's an okay story. I didn't think it was definitely not the best in the book. Overall, this is a really strong book. 3 out of the 4 novellas in this thing were made into movies. So it's definitely a 9 on my scale, 1 to 10. Then we get to The Terror by Dan Simmons, and as you can see, this is a chunky book. 950 pages or so. This is basically about an expedition back in the 1800s, trying to go across the northern side of Canada over to the Pacific, basically to find what they called the Northwest Passage, which would have made trade and stuff a lot easier back then if they could find a way to do it. But the book starts off with both ships in the expedition pretty much stuck in the ice, and It follows various characters from different points of view, and this is probably one of the best books, if not the best book that I read this year, and I would give this one a 10 out of 10. And even though it's a chunky book, I read it in less than a week, which is saying something with my kids running around. So if you get a chance, try to pick this one up. Another book I read this year that I don't have a copy of because I read it as an ebook was My Effin Life by Geddy Lee. And it's basically a biography of him as a child. It tells a bit about his parents surviving the Holocaust and how they met, and then goes into how the band Rush was formed. And Rush is my favorite band of all time, so I enjoyed the book immensely. And it was an interesting insight to see some of the things that they went through, some of the small changes and challenges that they had throughout their careers. I enjoyed the book a lot. I will say that Rush wasn't like the party band, like maybe like Motley Crue was, you know. Probably the roughest part of the book was when he mentions some of the drug use that they went into back in the late 70s, maybe early 80s. But eventually they kind of grew out of it and went on to become, you know, what they were. And just, I mean, they were already established at that point, and they just got bigger and bigger. And I discovered them in the 80s and loved their music, and I've loved it ever since. Another Alan Steele book I read was called Labyrinth of Night, and that's basically a Mars expedition has discovered some structures on Mars, and they've dug down into them. And the interior of the structure is almost like a puzzle box, to where they have to solve different things to get through each door. And at one point, they finally get through a door, and some bad stuff happens, and then the story goes from there. I would probably rate that one a 7 out of 10. And so that's pretty much it. That's kind of what I've read in the last year and a half or so. And I hope you enjoyed some of the things I've said. Maybe I've given you some ideas for stuff to read yourself. Until next time, keep enjoying that reading, my friends. Bye-bye. And if you go on and read the Genesis of Shannara series, the Genesis, why can't I say it?